Alright, YouTube, this is a little more serious and down to earth than the previous video on the topic of Joanne Rivers' little joke. It's a 4th of July message that I wanted to get out to people because I think a lot of times when people celebrate the 4th or any other national holiday, their sense of patriotism then takes over. You get people in this same sort of dichotomy that is exposed every time there's an election, where the majority of people sort of rally behind either the ins or outs of government. The Democratic and Republican Party have been these two sides for some time now, over a century. And what you get is people seem to think that patriotism entails sort of party loyalty, the loyalty to their party's ideology, more or less, which couldn't be further from the truth. Patriotism, in a sense as it relates to the United States, because of the way in which our country was founded, upon the idea of limited government, the idea of a constitution that constrains, and separation of powers as well, that constrains the different parts of the government, what they're allowed to do, and so forth. Patriotism is simply support of nation. It has nothing to do with support of government. It has nothing to do with support of a party. It has nothing to do with support of even a specific ideology beyond the ideology of its founding, which would be the Constitution. Everything else relates in a more and more vague manner as you move away from this sort of constitutional core. At least within the United States. Of course, within some countries, the way they've been structured, patriotism would entail something different. In a jingoistic society, patriotism would be a sort of blind support of the military complex. This is not supposed to be, anyway, a jingoistic society. If you read the Federalist Papers, it was quite clear that this country was never supposed to undertake the sort of foreign adventurism that it does in this modern day and age, post-Cold War, essentially after the World Wars period. And you can argue that that's for better or for worse. There are some that would say, well, that's advanced us as a society, it's made us a superpower, and then there are others who say, yes, but in becoming a superpower, have we sacrificed a lot of that sort of freedom that we used to enjoy to a greater degree? Or at least it was expected to be enjoyed. Of course, in the sort of industrial era, you sort of lost some of those freedoms anyway, to the corporations and so forth. Patriotism has nothing to do with blind support of government. We all heard, after 9/11, when Bush was at the height of his popularity, if Fox News came out, I can remember it at the time, to call anyone who criticized Bush's warmongering as unpatriotic. And it wasn't true. It was a lie. It was just his attack dogs in the media going after people. They seized upon the fact that he was popular for a short period of time. And they continued it far too long, which has actually helped his demise in many ways because the media, the right-wing part of the media was seen as just blatantly dishonest after a while. Patriotism has nothing to do with supporting the president, with supporting Congress, with supporting the Supreme Court, with supporting your governor, or even supporting the military, I would argue. The idea of a standard-bearing sort of centralized military system would have been a foreign concept to the founders. And remember, this country was built upon the backs of people who had risen up against their own government and attacked them. The Declaration of Independence is looked at as, well, then we became a country. But it's not true. That's a lie. We became a country upon the culmination, the end of that war period. I would say, further than that, also the War of 1812, when the British could easily, had things gone differently, reconquered their colony. Or their group of colonies, which had marginally expanded by that point. Up until that point, the United States couldn't claim itself as a country beyond rhetoric because it didn't have the capability of defending itself. Only through the winning of the Revolutionary War, essentially the British realizing that it was fruitless to keep supplying people across the entire Atlantic Ocean, actually created this country. Until then, a declaration made no difference because the British who reigned over the area didn't care if they declared independence. And the revolution wasn't even a popular uprising. Only about a third of the population at most supported or took part in the Revolutionary War. Another third were squarely on the side of the British. In a way, New England, up here where I am, was actually quite a bit more British friendly, with the exception of the state I happen to be in Vermont, which at the time had very little loyalty to the British because it didn't have any shipping industry. Those northern states that had heavy industry in the coastal areas tended to support the British because of trade. And they supported them again in the War of 1812 to some extent for the same reasons. Vermont, of course, does not have access to the ocean until, of course, the climate changes and Lake Champlain becomes sort of an Arctic Ocean inlet. But patriotism has nothing to do with support of the government. In fact, if the government is bad, it's patriotic to question it and even oppose it. That would be actual patriotism. You've got a bad government. Patriotism is support of country. Well, if the country is going downhill because of bad decisions being made in D.C., in our case, or the decision-making process in any country, there's no greater patriotism than to put your foot down and start protesting, which is something that people seem to ignore. When Bush was the president, those that were opposing the war, on both a moral basis and a fiscal basis, were called unpatriotic. But they were the actual patriots. They knew what a lot of people didn't want to understand, which was that it was a bad idea to get involved in Iraq. They realized that there was faulty intelligence. They realized that there was dishonesty and corruption going on, and they realized that we were going to spend money through the nose trying to secure an area that now, in retrospect, if we look at current events, is still falling apart and is falling into the hands of people that are even worse than Saddam ever could have possibly been. I think that this will also happen in the future in Syria. I think our perturbation going on in Syria with drones and so forth and arming the FSA is going to come back and bite us in another decade. I expect to be in my 30s and see that Syria is falling apart. And the same is holding true under Obama. Obama and his administration and people in Congress, both on his side and not on his side, and the other party too, are making bad decisions. The NSA surveillance is a bad decision. I would claim unconstitutional as well, but at the very least a very bad decision. It takes our country in the wrong direction. The IRS scandal, all the other scandals, the fact that the economy is not growing like it's supposed to, it's still growing very slowly. Jobs report notwithstanding, which I fully expect to be revised downwards as every other jobs report has been for the last several years. Thus, because the government right now doesn't appear to know what it's doing, or is corrupt and doesn't care, there's no higher patriotism than to stand up against it and voice the fact that we don't agree with their decisions. Both parties, look at them. They're bipartisan when it comes to something like the NSA. Both sides at least give lip service to the fact that it's such a great idea. And you see the Democrats and you saw McCain come out and say, oh, well, yeah, of course it's keeping our country safe. It's keeping them terrorists from attacking us. And then you hear Nancy Pelosi come out and say, well, yes, it stopped a dozen terrorist attacks. Feinstein will come out and support it. All these people will. The Harry Reids and the Clappers and so forth, and Congress and in these bureaus and agencies. And it's clearly bad for the country. Thus, standing up against that is a form of patriotism. When the government is wrong, then a true patriot says, well, the government's wrong. It's simply telling the truth. It is how it is. It isn't even a partisan issue. If something is not working, it doesn't matter who supports or opposes it, whether it's bipartisan or it's a partisan issue or it's something that's been foisted on the government from some agency or whatever, it's still not helping the country. That which helps the country as a whole is patriotic. That which helps part of the country is partisan. That which helps nobody, like the NSA, is just a terrible scumfuck idea that some idiot in some bureau or agency cooked up, foisted upon the government, largely speaking, and then codified into law under fear-mongering during the post-9/11 period. It's exactly what it is. So this 4th of July, I agree with Ron Paul on this. Ron Paul called on people to celebrate the 4th of July by opposing tyranny and so forth. Well, I'll join you, Ron, because even though you're not the president, You seem to be more level-headed than most of these people that are currently holding office, including, by the way, your son, who openly admits he's not a libertarian. I would agree with him there. He's marginally libertarian on some issues, but otherwise just a neocon, just like Mitt Romney, which he is not going to get my vote as a result of that, nor will any of the other idiots that they've got currently. None of them would get my vote. None of them are worth voting for. I'm not going to choose between two turds. It's a false dichotomy. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. Again, as I said before, people shouldn't be forced to choose between the lesser of two evils. We should be able to choose between the greater of two or more goods. Several people thought that comment was profound or some shit like that. But it's true. Think about it. I mean, we shouldn't have to choose between two crappy candidates. Who have we got? We got dishonest asshole Obama and warmongering McCain. And of course, McCain had his airhead sidekick, which made him unelectable anyway, so it's a foregone conclusion who was going to win. And then we got Mitt the Twit Romney going up against same said dishonest Obama. So it was basically no choice at all. We haven't really had a choice in government since 2000. Well, actually before that, because Al Gore was no peachy individual either. So yeah, basically my entire life has been lived under bad government. I can understand thus why the country is sort of falling apart. And as a patriotic individual, this means I support my country completely. But I want to see the way in which it operates reform, because I feel that although the country is great, although its founding purpose is great, I do believe in American exceptionalism very much. I think anyone who doesn't believe the United States is exceptional doesn't understand their history. But in order to remain exceptional, in order to remain a great country, in order to remain the head of the world, the most powerful country, we need to reform the way in which our laws work. We also need to reform the way in which the public reacts to dishonest politicians, because right now they've gotten so jaded they no longer care. If Bush or Obama had been elected in the 50s or 60s, they would have been removed from office. Millions of people would have marched on DC. They probably would have torched the White House by now if they hadn't been removed by force by Congress. Nixon was impeached and ended up resigning before he could get kicked out so he could keep getting his pension. Nixon was impeached for far less than Bush or Obama have done. Both of them. I called for Bush's impeachment years ago, at around 2006. I was tired of his crap, and I wasn't too fond of him by about 2002. That's how quickly he wore thin. The same holds true for Obama, because they've got bad ideas. They're harming the country. And there are a lot of people in Congress who are complicit in this, on both sides again. A lot of the old guard from the Bush era is still in office. A lot of these people have been there so long they kind of seem to have forgotten what it's like to be the average citizen. They're rich. They don't care if the economy goes south. They don't have to worry. Their business partners will take care of them. I think they're completely out of touch with the people. I've recommended this before. The first step is we should try to vote out as many incumbents as possible. If that doesn't work, then we should vote third party and get a new party go. I would say the Libertarian Party. You can vote for the Greens if you want. It doesn't really make a difference because they're more likely to feel accountable if they haven't been in power before. If they haven't already sort of put their roots down, maybe they'll do a little bit better. Of course, when the Republican Party first formed, the Republican Party were the good guys. Now they're just the same old shit as the Democratic Party, only under a different name, although their views are, 9/10 of the time are basically identical. On all the wrong issues, too. They can't agree on issues where there is a one side that's clearly right and one side that's clearly wrong, but on issues where neither of them are right, they agree fully. So yes, this 4th of July message, essentially what I want to say is, if you want to be a patriot, the way to do it isn't simply saying, oh, well, he's got an R after his name or he's got a D after his name, so I'm not going to criticize anything they do because I'm a party loyalist. That's almost the epitome of the opposite of patriotism, especially within an American context. When people within the United States, they say we're the greatest country in the world. I'll agree with you. But that doesn't mean that I become ethnocentric and egotistical and say, well, we're the greatest country regardless of what we do. No one should question our leaders or our decision-making process. We should fully support it all, and we'll steamroll you for your oil and so forth. That's not patriotism. That's being ethnocentric. Being patriotic is, I think that this is the greatest country on earth, and I want to see it stay that way. And so here, I try to hold my representative accountable. I try to hold the president when I see something wrong, when I see a scandal, when I see a politician lying, when I see that there's abuse of power, I call it out for what it is, regardless of what party they happen to be a member of. Because it ultimately doesn't matter. They're still a member of one of these two large, corrupt parties. And they both make great deals of mistakes, large numbers of them. So patriotism has nothing to do with, oh, well, the government's great because, there's a Democrat in charge. Thank goodness the Republicans aren't. Or, yeah, well, the Republicans in the House are great and these terrible Democrats, we've all got to vote them out. What difference is it going to make who you vote in or out? There's still going to be members of these parties that are financed by the same banks. Goldman Sachs funded Romney and Obama. Who do you think controls these people? He who controls the purse strings controls the leaders, and the purse strings are largely held by large corporations, unions, bureaus, lobbies, and banks. Well, they fund both sides. That way, no matter who wins, they still do win, because they've got their ear. So this 4th of July, please try to remember all this hyper-American barbecue and flag-waving nonsense. That's ethnocentrism. Right now, we don't have much of a reason to celebrate. And I think the majority of Americans understand. Look at Congress's approval rating. Look at Obama's approval rating. We realize the government is corrupt right now. Thus, we need to start discussing ways of alleviating that so that the economy can pick up. It doesn't matter if you're on the right or on the left when it comes to economics. Surely you can agree on this one thing. That regardless of what side's in power, if they are corrupt, it is ultimately not going to help the country, regardless of whether you agree with their fiscal views. Social views, it's the same thing. If you've got some tyrannical police state authoritarian in charge, it does not matter what their views are on wedge issues because they're going to grind down the majority of the population either way. And if you're living in a totalitarian state, it doesn't matter if you're left or right. It doesn't matter if you're gay or straight or black or white. It doesn't matter if you're Native American or Asian. It doesn't matter if you're an immigrant or your family's been here for 300 years. It's still a totalitarian state and life's still going to be terrible. And ultimately, the state will probably collapse, leading to civil war and leading to you getting raped and killed. That's why we try to reform the way the country operates. I don't think that the founders of the United States could have envisioned a time when patriotism would be defined as obeying the government, or as liking their policies, or as being a member of one party or the other. We were warned explicitly not to even bother forming political parties. Now that they've formed, at the very least, they need to be tempered, and people need to get past the sort of partisan bickering nonsense, which has never helped our country in the history of its existence, and never will. If the country comes first, if a person truly cares about the United States, then they don't fall prey to the partisan bickering. Or if they do, then upon hearing somebody explain, as I am attempting to right now, that it's not helpful to the country, they will say, he's right, or she's right, or they are right when they say this. It's not helping the country, it's hurting the country. You're not patriotic if you're doing that. It's just flushing us further down that toilet towards tyranny that people really don't want to be mired in tyrannical shit all the time. That's about all. Happy 4th of July. Peace out.